Hello. Over the next few minutes, I would like to give you an overview of the research project that I recently conducted, as well as give you some recommendations for improving the research project itself, as well as improving instruction in the science classroom. The research project that I recently conducted correlated LPAC scores, of which there are 4, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, to their traditional summative assessment scores. By traditional summative assessment scores, I mean tests that I would normally give in my high school science course. I also correlated those same traditional summative assessment scores to responses on an exit survey that was given to students immediately after completing said assessment. The major finding in my research project was the strong positive correlation between LPAC scores and traditional summative assessment scores. This indicates that when a student has a strong fluency in the English language, they have the ability to score highly on traditional summative assessment scores. When students score low on the LPAC score, or on the LPAC test, they have a correlation with lower summative assessment scores. The minor finding in my research was that there was, on average, little to no significant correlation between the exit survey responses that I received and summative assessment scores. In order to use these results to improve education in the science classroom, I recommend the implementation of multiple and dynamic ELD, or English Language Development strategies. A couple of my personal favorites after conducting research into this topic are cloze paragraphs, CLOZE, which is essentially a fill-in-the-blank assessment, which can be used as an activity or a speaking activity in the class, as well as various scaffolding activities in which the student is given a sentence frame and has to fill in that sentence frame with a meaningful word or minor phrase in order to make the statement correct or appropriate. These two activities are examples of lowering the cognitive load on English language learners so that whatever cognitive load they are under is dedicated to the content rather than the language, while at the same time allowing the student to more closely focus on the content, the science content, giving them the opportunity to practice appropriate English language. Now, the goal of this improvement or implementation is to, of course, increase the access of English language learners to science content. It is an axiom that the science classroom acts exactly like a foreign language classroom. While the scientific concepts that we cover in class are not particularly complicated, several students are precluded from that content because they do not have access to it via their English language fluency or lack thereof. By improving their English language skills, we can therefore improve their LPAC scores, which again have been strongly positively correlated to summative assessment scores. Now, the minor finding of my research project included exit survey responses, which were either weakly or not positively correlated with assessment scores. The goal of that survey was to examine the experience of the students as they went through the unit itself in light of their perceived performance on the summative assessment. After the fact, I believe that the survey that I gave to students was not as effective as it could or should have been. One of the reasons I believe this is because when attempting to analyze data and choose the analysis method for those survey responses, I realized that I had nothing to compare that data to. In the future, if this research project were to be conducted again, and I do think that it could and should be attempted again, and a pre-survey should be included in the project, so that at the end of the unit, at the end of the summative assessment, the change in the perceived experience of the students can be gathered and analyzed. Because I do believe that that would be a positive addition to the data set that I've generated. In order to apply these recommendations in the classroom, a already existing content unit must exist. Now, if a particular teacher has a unit planned, ready to go, the materials already conceived of and produced, the application or implementation of these recommendations can consist of little more than creating an additional close activity, to use an example that I used earlier in this presentation, which, from experience, need only take about 15 minutes to design. Take a simple paragraph or maybe set of paragraphs and remove various terms that you deem appropriate and replace them with blanks. Now, you can do one of two things. You can provide a word bank, or you do not have to provide a word bank based on what you as the instructor perceive to be appropriate for your classroom. With this in mind, any sort of anticipated timeline for this to be implemented in the future does not have to be much more than 2 or 3, in my estimation, days in addition to what your normal unit implementation would be. Thank you for your time, and I hope that my recommendations will be useful in supporting your performance as a teacher and student performance in acquiring the English language.